You ever have a moment when you open your heart completely, and the person you love just looks at you like you've turned into a stranger? Like suddenly, everything between you, the laughter, the comfort, the trust, starts to crack? I didn't plan for it to happen that night. I wasn't even trying to start a fight. I just wanted to be honest. That's all. But honesty can be dangerous, especially when it's about the parts of you people aren't ready to see. My name's Isabella. I'm 24, and this is the story of how being honest about my desires almost destroyed the best relationship I ever had. Or at least, what I thought was the best. It started one quiet Friday night. The kind of night where everything feels soft. The city lights outside my apartment flickering through the curtains. The low hum of music playing, and Liam lying next to me on the couch, his hand lazily tracing circles on my knee. We'd been together for a year, and he was the kind of guy everyone said was perfect boyfriend material. Calm, reliable, sweet in the ways that mattered. My friends used to joke that I'd finally found my safe place. But the truth? Even though he made me feel safe, a part of me always felt unseen. I'd spent months burying that feeling. Smiling when he kissed me, laughing when we cooked dinner together, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. But deep down, I wanted more. Something different. Something raw and thrilling. And it wasn't about cheating or betrayal. It was about trust, about letting go in a way that felt electric. That night, I don't know what pushed me to finally say it. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was how close we were, his head resting on my shoulder, the warmth of his breath against my neck. I just whispered it softly. "Can I tell you something? Kinda personal?" He smiled without looking up from his phone. "Of course. What's up?" And I said it, my heart pounding. I want us to try something different, something a little kinky." At first he laughed. I did too, nervously. I rushed to explain, stumbling over my words. Not anything crazy, just, like light stuff. Spanking, maybe a little roleplay, blindfolds, just something fun. I thought it could be. That's when he stopped smiling. He looked at me like I'd just confessed to something awful. "Wait, what? You're into that? Weird stuff?" Weird. That word hit me harder than I expected. I tried to keep my tone light. "It's not weird, it's actually pretty normal. A lot of couples do it. It's just, Isabella," he interrupted, setting his phone down. "You're serious about this?" "Yes," I said quietly, "but only if you're comfortable. I'm not saying we have to do it now, or ever, if you don't want to. I just wanted to be honest about what I like." He leaned back, arms crossed. His face was unreadable, but I could feel the judgment dripping from the silence between us. "So what? Regular intimacy isn't enough for you now?" My throat went dry. "That's not what I'm saying, because honestly this sounds kinda gross." That word again. But worse this time. Gross. I remember forcing a smile to hide how my chest was caving in. "It's not gross, Liam, it's just playful. Trust-based. Like a way to connect differently." He shook his head. "I don't know where you got this stuff from, but I'm not into that. At all. It's not normal, Isabella." I went quiet. I didn't even know what to say. I thought he'd at least ask why. I thought he'd try to understand. But instead he just turned back to his phone, muttering something like, "You should probably keep those thoughts to yourself." That night, I barely slept. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with guilt and confusion. Did I mess up? Was I too much? The next morning I made breakfast like nothing happened. He acted normal, kissed my cheek, talked about his weekend plans, as if my confession had just evaporated. But every time he looked at me, I felt that invisible distance widen, like there was a wall between us now, one that only I could see. Days passed. Then weeks, and every time I tried to gently bring it up, to explain that it wasn't about him being not enough, that it was about trust and openness, he'd shut it down. Sometimes he'd sigh, sometimes he'd snap, sometimes he'd just go silent. At one point he said, "Why can't you just be normal, Isabella? Why do you always have to complicate things?" That sentence, it burned itself into my memory, because I wasn't trying to complicate things. I was trying to be real, and yet the more real I tried to be, the more unreal our relationship started to feel. I began wondering if he ever really knew me at all, or if he only loved the version of me that was easy to digest. The polite, normal girl who didn't ask for too much. The girl who smiled even when she felt misunderstood, but pretending started to hurt more than the truth. And deep down, I knew I couldn't bury this part of myself forever. What I didn't know was how much that truth would cost me. Because once a secret like that comes out, it doesn't just disappear. It lingers, like a crack in the glass, spreading quietly, waiting for the moment everything finally shatters. And for me, that moment came sooner than I ever expected after that night. Things between us didn't break right away. They just started to fade, slowly, quietly, like colors bleeding out of a photograph. We still laughed sometimes, we still went on dates, but something invisible had changed. Every touch felt a little colder. Every silence a little louder. I started to notice small things. The way he'd flinch slightly when I leaned in too close, or how he'd change the subject whenever the topic even brushed against intimacy. He said he loved me, but love without curiosity feels like living with a stranger who just happens to know your favorite coffee order. I tried to convince myself it was fine, that I was overthinking, that maybe he just needed time. But then one night, we were out with friends, and someone made a light joke about people's kinks. Everyone laughed, except me. Because I saw the way Liam's eyes flicked toward me, that flash of quiet judgment. The same look from that night, like I was someone he didn't quite trust anymore. When we got home, I asked him, "Why did you look at me like that?" He played dumb at first. "What are you talking about?" "At dinner," I said, when they were joking around. "You looked at me like you were embarrassed." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Isabella, not everything's about you." The way he said my name, sharp, like a warning, made me shrink instantly. I wanted to defend myself, but the words caught in my throat. Because I realized something. He was embarrassed. Not of me exactly, but of what I'd revealed to him. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes from being rejected by someone who's still holding your hand. That night, after he fell asleep, I went to the bathroom and sat on the cold tiles with my phone. I searched, "Is it wrong to want kink in a relationship?" And the internet, in all its chaos, gave me a million voices whispering back, "No, you're not weird. You're not broken," but it didn't help, because Liam's voice was louder than all of them. The next few weeks were a blur of silence and awkward half-conversations. He started working late. I started pretending not to care. We still said "I love you," but it sounded more like a habit than a truth. And then came the night everything really cracked. It was a Saturday. I had planned something simple. Dinner, candles, music. I thought maybe we could reconnect. I wanted to show him that this wasn't about some wild fantasy. It was about us. About trust. About trying to bridge the distance between us. He came home later than planned. His eyes looked tired, or maybe just detached. I smiled anyway. "Hey, I made your favorite pasta." He nodded, barely looking at me, scrolling through his phone as he sat down. I tried to talk, about work, about my day, but he was somewhere else entirely. I could feel it. Finally, I took a breath and said softly, "Liam, can we please talk?" He looked up annoyed. "About what?" "About us," He sighed, the kind of sigh that says, "Here we go again." "I just feel like we've been distant," I said carefully. "I know things got awkward after that night, but I didn't mean to upset you. I just wanted to be open with you, honest." He set his fork down, eyes narrowing slightly. "Isabella, I told you how I feel. Why do you keep bringing it up? You're making this weird." "I'm not trying to make it weird," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just don't want to feel ashamed for who I am." He laughed, a small, cold laugh that didn't sound like him. "Oh, come on. Nobody's making you ashamed. You're just obsessed with this stuff. It's not normal, Isa. You need to let it go." My heart sank. "You think I'm obsessed? Because I wanted to share something personal with you?" He stood up, shaking his head. "You're turning this into drama. I'm tired. I don't want to talk about this again." And just like that, he walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there under the soft glow of candlelight, alone with 2 untouched plates of food and a silence that screamed louder than any argument. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there, frozen, feeling that hollow ache in my chest. But when I finally sat down, my hands started shaking, not from anger, but from this deep, unbearable sense of rejection. Because it wasn't just that he said no, it was how he said it. Like my desires made me less lovable. Like being curious about myself was something dirty. That night, I lay in bed and stared at him sleeping next to me, breathing softly like nothing was wrong. I wondered if he'd ever realize how small he made me feel, how even silence can become its own kind of cruelty. Days turned into weeks again, and slowly I began to change, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in the quietest, most invisible ways. I stopped bringing up what I wanted. I laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I said it's fine when it wasn't, and worst of all, I started believing him, believing that maybe I was weird. Maybe I was asking for too much. But then something happened that I didn't expect. One afternoon, while scrolling online, I stumbled upon a thread. People like me, sharing stories about relationships, honesty, and shame. Some of them were in tears. Others had found strength, but all of them were raw and real. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. That's when the thought hit me. Maybe the real problem wasn't what I wanted. Maybe the problem was who I wanted it with, and once that thought crossed my mind, there was no going back. It's strange how silence can become a habit. How 2 people can share a bed, a life, and still feel like ghosts haunting the same room. That's what our relationship became. Quiet, careful, and suffocating. I learned to read the signs in his body language, the way he'd tense when I brushed his arm, the way he'd retreat into his phone when I tried to talk about anything deeper, and every time it happened, I swallowed another piece of myself. At first, I thought I could fix it. I told myself that love meant compromise, that patience would make him understand. But patience doesn't heal what someone refuses to see. It only teaches you how to stay quiet longer. I started journaling, just to get the noise out of my head. Writing down the things I couldn't say out loud. I miss feeling wanted. I hate that I feel guilty, for being honest. I'm scared I'm losing myself, trying to keep someone who doesn't even see me anymore. Each sentence felt like pulling a splinter out of my skin, and yet I couldn't stop, because deep down, I was terrified of what I already knew, that I was no longer happy. Then one evening, something shifted. I was at a cafe after work, sipping coffee and trying to finish a design project on my laptop. The table next to me was occupied by 2 women around my age, laughing softly as they talked about relationships. I wasn't eavesdropping, but one of them said something that hit me like a thunderclap. She said, "It's not wrong to want more. It's wrong to keep pretending you don't." That sentence lodged itself in my brain. I stared at my screen, unable to focus, because that's exactly what I'd been doing, pretending. Pretending to be easy, normal, simple. pretending to fit into a shape that didn't belong to me. When I got home that night, Liam was on the couch, scrolling as usual. I stood there for a while, watching him. The man I thought I knew so well. The man I'd imagined marrying one day. And I realized how far away he felt. "Hey," I said softly. He looked up. "Hey," I hesitated, then took a breath. "Can we talk, please?" He groaned quietly. "Is this about that stuff again?" "No," I said quickly. "It's about us." He put his phone down but didn't look thrilled. "Fine, what's wrong now?" I forced a smile, even though my heart was pounding. "Nothing's wrong, I don't want to feel like we're walking on eggshells all the time." He exhaled sharply. "Isabella, I don't know what you want from me." "I just want honesty," I said. "I want connection. I want to feel like I can be myself with you, all of me, without you making me feel ashamed for it." He frowned. "You're still hung up on that? I told you I'm not into that stuff. Why can't you respect that?" "I do respect it," I said, my voice trembling now. "But it feels like you don't respect me." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then he said quietly, "You're being dramatic again." And something in me broke. Maybe it was the way he said it. Dismissive. Tired. Or maybe it was the fact that I'd been shrinking myself for months just to keep this thing alive. But I suddenly felt exhausted. Not angry, just empty. I turned away from him, afraid he'd see the tears building in my eyes. "Do you even love me anymore?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his words came out like a sigh. "Of course I do, but you're making it really hard to." That's when I knew. Love shouldn't feel conditional. It shouldn't depend on how quiet or convenient you make yourself. I nodded slowly, trying to steady my breathing. "Okay," I said. "Then maybe I'm making it hard because I've been trying to love you honestly." He looked confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" I met his eyes, and for the first time I didn't flinch. "It means I'm done pretending. I'm done apologizing for who I am." He didn't reply, just stared, as if he couldn't process the words coming out of my mouth. I walked into the bedroom, shut the door, and for the first time in months, I cried. Really cried. Not because I'd lost him, but because I'd lost myself trying to keep him. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened. Made coffee, kissed my cheek, said, "See you tonight." But I didn't say it back, because something inside me had shifted, quietly, irrevocably. That day at work, I couldn't focus. My mind kept replaying everything. The looks, the words, the way my truth had been turned into something dirty. I thought about leaving. The idea scared me, but not as much as staying did. And then I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my journal, flipped to the last page and wrote 4 words. "I'm choosing myself now." It didn't feel brave. It felt terrifying, but it also felt right. What I didn't realize was that choosing myself would uncover something much deeper. Something that would change everything I thought I knew about love. Desire and the secrets we hide to keep people comfortable. Because a week later, I found something that made my entire world stop. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. The air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. I was cleaning the apartment, humming softly to distract myself from the thoughts that had been looping in my head for days. Liam had gone out to grab groceries, though he'd been gone for nearly 2 hours. That wasn't unusual anymore. Lately, he'd been taking longer and longer errands. I was dusting the shelf by his desk when I noticed his laptop still open. Normally, I never touched his things. I wasn't that kind of girlfriend. But something about that day, that strange stillness, made me pause. The screen was dim but not locked. And right there, in the corner of the browser, was a tab labeled Incognito. I didn't want to look. I really didn't. But curiosity mixed with dread has a way of pulling you in, even when you know it might hurt. I moved the mouse slightly, and my heart stopped. It wasn't porn or anything explicit. It was worse. It was a forum. A relationship advice thread titled, "When your girlfriend has weird sexual preferences and you don't know how to deal with it." He had written paragraphs. My name wasn't mentioned, but everything else was there. My age, what I'd said, how gross it made him feel, how he was starting to see her differently now. There were dozens of comments. People calling me perverted, attention-seeking, a red flag. Some said he should dump me before I dragged him into my weird world. And Liam had replied to several of them. He'd written, "Yeah, I think she's a bit messed up. I don't know where this came from. She used to be normal. Used to be normal." I felt something inside me collapse. My hands went cold, my vision blurred, and I just stood there staring at those words like they were carved into my skin. For months, I'd been blaming myself, thinking I'd pushed too far, that maybe I'd made him uncomfortable. But this was cruelty dressed up as confusion. He hadn't just rejected me. He'd humiliated me, turned my vulnerability into entertainment for strangers. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was on the floor, the laptop still open in front of me. My breath came in shallow, broken gasps. My mind was racing, flashing through every moment we'd shared. Every touch that now felt false, every "I love you" that suddenly sounded like a lie. When the door opened, I didn't even look up. He froze in the doorway, grocery bag in hand. "Isabella, what's wrong?" I turned the screen toward him, my voice trembling. "What is this?" His eyes widened. "You went through my laptop?" "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't turn this around. You wrote this. You told strangers that I was messed up." He set the bag down slowly, guilt flickering across his face before he tried to cover it with frustration. "You weren't supposed to see that." "I just needed advice." "Advice?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Advice? You called me gross. You said I used to be normal. Do you have any idea how that feels?" He took a step closer. "Isabella, you're overreacting." Those words again. Overreacting. Dramatic. Too much. Something snapped. All the silence I'd swallowed. All the apologies I'd whispered into empty rooms. It all came pouring out. "No, Liam. I am not overreacting. I opened up to you. I trusted you with something personal, something fragile, and you made me feel disgusting for it. You didn't try to understand. You didn't talk to me. You turned me into a joke for people online." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not like that. You made me uncomfortable, okay? I didn't know how to handle it. Then you talked to me," I shouted, tears spilling now. "That's what people who love each other do. They talk. You don't go online and destroy someone's trust because you can't handle a conversation." He went silent. The kind of silence that isn't regret. It's avoidance. His eyes darted away like a child caught in a lie. Finally, he muttered, "Maybe we're just too different." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was the most cowardly thing he could have said. "Too different," I repeated softly. "No, Liam, we're not too different. You just don't want to love the parts of me that don't fit your idea of normal." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Then quietly, I closed the laptop and stood up. My voice was calm now, too calm. "You know what's funny? I was never asking you to be someone you're not. I just wanted you to see me, but you'd rather love a version of me that doesn't exist." He looked at me, maybe realizing, too late, what he'd done. "Don't," I said. "I'm done explaining myself." I walked into the bedroom, grabbed my bag, and started packing. My hands were shaking, but my heart felt strangely steady. He followed me, his voice low. "You're really doing this?" I zipped the bag and turned to face him. "You already did, the moment you turned my truth into something shameful." He tried to speak again, but I was already walking toward the door. When I stepped outside, the cool air hit my face, and for the first time in months, I could actually breathe. My chest hurt, my eyes burned, but underneath the pain, there was clarity. It's strange how losing someone can sometimes feel like finding yourself again. I didn't look back. Not once. The first night alone was the hardest. My apartment felt too quiet, too clean, like all the air had been sucked out of it. His toothbrush was gone. His hoodie wasn't draped over the chair anymore. Every corner held a memory I wasn't ready to face yet. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the small dent in the pillow where he used to sleep. My phone kept lighting up with his messages. "Can we talk? And please don't end it like this." "I didn't mean to hurt you." I read them all, but I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I finally understood that replying would be punishing myself. That night, I cried again. But it wasn't the same kind of crying as before. It wasn't that desperate, choking kind of pain. It was something softer, like grief that knew it needed to exist before peace could find space to grow. The next morning, I packed a small bag and left town for a few days. Just me, my car, and the open road. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just wanted distance. Distance from the memories, from the noise in my head, from the version of myself who kept apologizing for her truth. I ended up in a small coastal town 3 hours away. The ocean was gray and wild that day, the waves crashing against the rocks like they were angry on my behalf. I stood there for what felt like hours, the wind tangling my hair, salt stinging my lips, and for the first time in months, I felt alive. You know that feeling when pain and freedom mix together so tightly you can't tell which one is which? That's what it felt like. It hurt, but it was mine. My choice. My story. Over the next few days, I started to rebuild in small ways. I deleted the photos of us, but not all of them. Just enough to make space for new ones. I cooked for myself and played music without worrying if he'd like it. I took long walks and wrote in my journal again. But this time, my words didn't sound like apologies. They sounded like beginnings. One evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, I wrote something I'll never forget. I used to think love meant never being too much. But now I realize the right person will never make you shrink to fit their comfort. It became my truth. Weeks passed. The text from Liam slowed, then stopped altogether. Part of me expected that would hurt, but it didn't. Not anymore. The silence that once felt unbearable had turned into something peaceful, like finally learning to breathe underwater. I started therapy, something I should have done long ago. I wanted to understand why I'd been so afraid of losing love that I'd forgotten to love myself. My therapist asked me a question that stuck. Do you think you wanted Liam to accept your desires, or did you want him to accept you? It hit hard, because it wasn't really about the kink, or the fantasies, or any of that. It was about wanting to be seen, the parts that aren't polite, aren't tidy, aren't normal. I wanted someone to look at my complexity and say, "That's okay. You're still worthy of love." And when he didn't, I thought that meant I wasn't. But it didn't. It never did. A few months later, I went to a small art exhibit in the city. The theme was unfiltered. Every piece was about vulnerability, messy, beautiful, painful truth. There was one photo that stopped me cold. It was a woman standing in front of a mirror, her reflection cracked, but her face calm. The caption read, "The mirror broke, not the woman. I stood there for a long time, tears stinging my eyes, because that's exactly how I felt. Broken reflection. Whole woman, I won't lie and say I never missed him. Sometimes when I passed a couple laughing in a cafe, or when I smelled that cologne he used to wear, I felt a soft ache in my chest. But it wasn't longing anymore. It was gratitude, because without him, I might never have found the courage to stop hiding. And maybe that's the cruelest, kindest thing about heartbreak, and it burns you down, yes, but it also clears the ground for something new to grow. Now, months later, I'm not ashamed of who I am anymore. I don't hide the things I want or the way I feel. I've learned that real intimacy isn't about matching tastes or perfect compatibility. It's about safety, honesty, and acceptance. Someone once told me, you can't make someone understand a language they refuse to learn. That's what Liam was. Someone who refused to learn my language. And that's okay, because not everyone is meant to understand you. Some people are just meant to teach you what you should never again accept. I still believe in love. Deeply. But not the kind that asks me to edit myself down. I believe in the kind of love that listens, that asks questions, that says I may not understand it yet, but I want to try. That's the kind of love I deserve. That's the kind of love we all deserve. Sometimes I wonder what he'd say if he saw me now. Standing taller, laughing louder, completely unashamed. Maybe he'd think I changed. Maybe he'd think I finally moved on. But the truth is, I didn't move on. I came home. To myself. And maybe that's the most radical thing a woman can do. I used to think healing was loud. That it looked like cutting your hair, deleting all your photos, traveling the world, doing something dramatic to prove you were okay. But I've learned that real healing is quiet. It's brushing your teeth when you don't feel like it. It's cooking dinner for one and lighting a candle anyway. It's being gentle with yourself when no one's watching. There were days when I still questioned myself. Was I wrong for wanting more? Was I too complicated? Too much? But then I remembered something my therapist said. The moment you start asking if you're too much is the moment you've been giving too little to yourself. That sentence changed everything. Because the truth is, I wasn't too much. I was just asking the wrong person to meet me halfway. I remember sitting in my car one night, parked outside the apartment that used to be ours. I hadn't planned to go there. My hands just drove on autopilot. The lights in his window were off. The place looked cold and lifeless. And in that stillness, I realized something. I didn't miss him. I missed me. The version of me I abandoned trying to make him love me right. That realization broke me open, but in the best way. Because once you finally meet the parts of yourself you've buried, the wild, the tender, the scared, the sensual, the unapologetic, you can never go back to being small again. And I think that's the most painful part of growth. You can't unsee your worth once you've seen it. You can't unknow your strength once you've faced your own reflection and didn't look away. Months later, someone new came into my life. Not in a movie-style fireworks and music way. It was quiet, gentle, unhurried. He didn't try to fix me or impress me. He just listened. And that's when I realized, the right kind of love doesn't feel like adrenaline. It feels like peace. For the first time in years, I felt safe. Not because he understood everything about me right away, but because he wanted to. He asked, he learned, he respected. There was no fear, no judgment, no performance. It felt like breathing again. And that's when I knew. I wasn't broken. I was just never handled with care. I look back now, and I don't hate Liam. I don't blame him. He loved me the only way he knew how, and that's okay. Some people come into your life to give you forever, others to give you lessons. He gave me both. He taught me that love without understanding will always feel like starvation. That passion without safety isn't love. It's chaos dressed up as desire. He taught me that when someone says, "You're too much," what they really mean is you're too honest for my comfort. And that's not your fault. Because the truth is, love isn't about dimming yourself to fit into someone's fragile comfort zone. Love is about being seen fully and still being chosen. If you're listening to this, and you've ever felt ashamed for the way you love, or the things you desire, or the person you are, I need you to hear this. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not too much. You are not unlovable. You are simply waiting for someone brave enough to meet you where you are. But before that happens, you have to be brave enough to meet yourself. Because when you do, when you stand in front of the mirror, stripped of every mask and whisper, "I'm still here. And I'm still enough," that's when real healing begins. I don't regret loving him. I don't regret the chaos, or the pain, or the nights I cried myself to sleep. Because all of it led me here, to this version of me. And she's strong. She's grounded. She's free. I used to chase love that made me dizzy. Now I crave the kind that makes me calm. So if you're in a place where your love story feels like it's falling apart, maybe it's not ending. Maybe it's just redirecting you back to yourself. And if you're listening to my story right now, remember this. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You don't have to silence your truth to keep someone comfortable. And you don't have to earn the kind of love that should have been gentle from the start. Sometimes walking away isn't giving up. It's finally choosing peace over permission. And that, I think, is the bravest love story of all. So, yeah, that's my confession. That's my story. And maybe, just maybe, it's yours too. They never tell you that peace can be terrifying, that silence, after months of chaos, can sound like a scream you can't locate. When Liam left, I thought I'd feel free, like a bird finally cut loose. But the truth? The first few weeks felt like standing in an empty house that still smelled like him. His toothbrush was gone, but his ghost wasn't. His energy clung to everything. My couch, my bed, even my playlist. I started sleeping with the TV on. Not because I liked the noise, but because silence had become too loud. Therapy helped, but only in fragments. My therapist, Elena, had this calm voice that made you feel like the world wasn't ending, even when it was. She didn't tell me to forget him. She told me to sit with the ache, to understand it. At first, I hated her for that. Every session felt like ripping open a wound I had barely stitched. I cried so much during those sessions that I started carrying makeup wipes in my purse. But week by week, something subtle started changing. Not in the world, but in me. I stopped apologizing for my emotions. I stopped filtering myself mid-sentence. I started saying what I really felt instead of what I thought people wanted to hear. It was small, almost invisible, but it was growth. One night, about 2 months after the breakup, I was scrolling through my phone in bed when a notification lit up my screen. Liam. My breath caught like a reflex. His name still had power over me, even though I hated that it did. The message was short. "Hey, hope you're doing okay." That's it. No apology. No explanation. Just that bland, careful sentence that said everything and nothing at once. My heart started racing. It's funny how the body remembers, how it can go from calm to chaos in seconds, just because of one name. I didn't reply that night. I locked my phone, placed it face down, and stared at the ceiling until the shadows turned into morning. The next day, I told Elena about it. She asked, "What did you feel when you saw his name?" I said, "Like my peace just shattered." She nodded and said softly, "Then maybe that's your answer." That day, I deleted his contact. It didn't mean I didn't still love him. It meant I finally loved myself more. But healing isn't linear. 2 days later, I found myself rereading old texts, laughing at inside jokes that used to make my chest ache. Then I cried, hard, because those moments were gone, frozen in a version of us that no longer existed. I started journaling instead. Every night I'd write letters, some to him, some to myself. Letters I'd never send. One night, I wrote, "Dear Isabella, stop romanticizing people who made you feel small. Stop mistaking intensity for intimacy. Stop confusing control with care." That letter saved me. Because when you write to yourself, you stop lying. You start telling the truth, even the ugly parts. I began reclaiming small things that used to belong to us. I went back to that cafe where we first met. The one with the blue walls and burnt caramel smell. I sat at our old table, alone, and for the first time, I didn't feel like half of something. I just felt whole. It's strange, how independence feels both heavy and liberating. You're free, but you're also accountable for every emotion now. There's no one left to blame. A few weeks later, another message from him appeared, this time on Instagram. He reacted to one of my stories, a photo of me smiling with my friends. Looking genuinely happy, he sent, "You look good. I miss you sometimes." I stared at that sentence for a long time, not because I wanted him back, but because I realized something profound. He missed the version of me that needed him. The version that apologized for her desires, that walked on eggshells to keep him comfortable. He didn't miss me now, because the me now wasn't small anymore, and some people can only love you when you're small enough to fit their hands. I didn't reply. I didn't even delete it. I just left it there, unread. A digital ghost of what used to be. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, turned on music, and started dancing around my apartment. Alone. Not for anyone to watch. Just because my body finally felt mine again. I laughed out loud when I caught my reflection in the window. Wild hair, teary eyes, wine in hand. I looked ridiculous, but I also looked alive. That's when I realized healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without falling apart. And that night, I finally slept without the TV on. They say time heals everything, but they don't tell you that memory doesn't understand clocks. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. The dream wasn't violent, it was worse. It was sweet. In it, Liam and I were lying on the couch watching old movies. He had his arm around me, his heartbeat steady against my cheek. I remember turning to him and whispering, "I love you." He smiled and said, "I know." That was all. But when I woke up, I couldn't breathe, because for a moment, it had felt real again. I got up, made tea, and sat by the window as the city slept. That's when I realized I wasn't haunted by him. I was haunted by the version of me who loved him. The girl who believed that love alone could fix everything. I started thinking back to when we met. It was at a friend's rooftop party, one of those summer nights that felt endless. I remember I was wearing a red dress I almost didn't buy because I thought it was too much. He walked over to me with that effortless charm, holding 2 drinks, saying, "You look like you belong in a movie scene." I laughed, but inside, I melted. Liam had this calm confidence, the kind that made you feel seen, even in a crowd. We talked for hours that night, about music, books, random things that didn't matter, but it felt easy, like I'd known him forever. He texted me the next morning, and by the end of that week, we were inseparable. He'd pick me up from work, bring me my favorite coffee, kiss my forehead like it was the most natural thing in the world. Everything about him screamed safe, but looking back now, I realize I confused comfort for compatibility. The first red flag came quietly. I remember telling him about my dream to travel alone, to backpack across Europe. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He said, "Why would you want to do that without me?" It sounded sweet at first, like he just wanted to be part of my adventures. But underneath there was something else, a subtle question that felt like ownership. Then came the smaller things. Him teasing me in front of his friends, then calling me too sensitive when I looked uncomfortable, or when I tried to open up about my past relationships and he'd say, "I don't need to hear about your exes. The past is the past." At the time, I told myself he just didn't like drama, but now I see it. He didn't like depth he couldn't control. And then came that night. It was about 6 months into our relationship. We were at my place, laughing over a movie, and I remember feeling close, safe enough to finally share something vulnerable. That's when I told him about my interests, about the softer side of me that craved something deeper, more playful, the side of me that wanted to explore trust, power, surrender. I said it carefully, like a confession. He went quiet. The air thickened. Then he laughed. Not cruelly, but the kind of laugh that stings because it's full of discomfort. He said, "You're into that stuff. I didn't think you were like that." I tried to explain how it wasn't about pain or extremes, how it was about connection, communication, trust. But the more I spoke, the more distant he looked. He finally said, "I don't want to do weird things. Can we just be normal?" Normal. That word still echoes sometimes. Because what he really meant was, "Can you be less of yourself for me?" After that night, something cracked. He didn't talk about it again, but I could feel the judgment lingering. Every time I tried to initiate affection, it felt heavier, like I had to prove I was normal again, and I started shrinking. I stopped mentioning my desires, stopped teasing him playfully, stopped being the woman who laughed too loud or asked too many questions. I became quieter, simpler, someone easier to love. But it wasn't love. It was survival. As I sat by the window holding that cup of tea, I felt my chest tighten with anger, not at him, but at me, because I had edited myself out of my own story just to be his happy ending. And I realized something no one tells you. When you abandon your truth to keep someone, you lose both. The tea had gone cold by the time the first light hit my apartment walls. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and whispered, "I forgive you." Not to him, to me. For every time I stayed silent. That morning I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my closet and pulled out that red dress. The one I wore the night we met. It still smelled faintly of summer and nostalgia. I put it on, looked in the mirror, and smiled. Not because it made me feel sexy, but because it made me feel me again. And for the first time since the breakup, I felt something stronger than sadness. I felt gratitude for the pain, for the lessons, for the chance to rebuild. Because sometimes the only way to find yourself again is to lose yourself completely first. It started with a simple decision, one that didn't feel simple at all. I was at a cafe, halfway through a cappuccino, when I saw his message again. "You look good. I miss you sometimes." I don't know what it was. Maybe the caffeine, maybe the sun pouring through the window, maybe the fact that I was tired of pretending I didn't care, but I did something reckless. I typed back, "Do you want to talk?" The 3 dots appeared instantly, then disappeared, then appeared again. My heart pounded like I was watching a bomb tick down. Finally, he replied, "Yeah, can I call you?" I stared at the screen for a full minute before I hit accept. His voice came through like a ghost from another life. "Hey," he said softly. I swallowed hard. "Hey." There was silence. Not the comfortable kind we used to share, but the kind that's filled with everything unsaid. He sighed first. "You look happy in your pictures." "I am," I said. He laughed under his breath. "Good, that's good." For a moment I almost softened. The familiarity of his voice felt like a memory I wanted to touch but couldn't hold. Then he said, "I've been thinking a lot about us." I stayed quiet, waiting. I didn't realize how much I messed things up until you were gone. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something in me had changed. The part of me that used to melt at his apologies had grown armor. "What made you realize that?" I asked. He hesitated. "I don't know, just everything feels empty lately. I thought maybe we could start over." There it was, the sentence I'd once prayed to hear, but now it just sounded hollow. "Start over?" I repeated. "And do what, Liam? Pretend the old things didn't happen?" He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't mean to make you feel small. I just didn't understand it. The things you wanted, they scared me." I closed my eyes, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "I wasn't asking you to be someone else, Liam. I was asking you to see me." "I did see you," he said quickly. "No," I whispered. "You saw the version of me that didn't challenge your comfort." He exhaled sharply. "You make it sound like I was some monster." "I never said that," I said, voice trembling. "You weren't a monster. You were just unready, and I kept waiting for you to meet me halfway." He went quiet again. Then, almost reluctantly, he asked, "Do you hate me?" That question hit harder than it should have. "No," I said softly. "I don't hate you. Hating you would mean I still care enough to carry that weight. I don't want to carry it anymore." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end, uneven and shallow. He said, almost in a whisper, "I miss how you used to look at me." I swallowed the ache in my throat. "I miss how I used to look at you too. But that girl doesn't exist anymore." He didn't say anything after that, and in that silence I realized we weren't talking about love anymore. We were talking about ghosts. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I know," I replied, and for once, that was enough. We talked a little longer, about work, mutual friends, meaningless small talk. But it felt like watching the credits of a movie I'd already seen too many times. When the call ended, I just sat there, phone in my lap, staring at my reflection in the cafe window. I didn't cry. I didn't shake, I just felt calm. Because closure doesn't come from what they say. It comes from realizing you no longer need to hear it. That night, I walked to the pier near my apartment, the one we used to visit during late-night drives. The water shimmered beneath the city lights, and the wind carried that faint salty smell I always loved. I whispered into the dark, "I forgive you, Liam, but this is where I let you go." And I swear, it felt like the ocean exhaled with me. As I walked back home, a small smile crept onto my face. Not because I was over him completely. Heartbreak doesn't vanish like that. But because I had finally stopped fighting the past. That night, I slept like someone who had finally made peace with her own story. And somewhere, in that stillness, I realized something else. Endings aren't always sad. Sometimes they're just beginnings in disguise. The day after that call felt eerily peaceful. I woke up and for the first time in months, I didn't check my phone. No waiting for a message that wouldn't come, no hoping for a sign, no rehearsing what I'd say if he texted again. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine. I made coffee, opened the windows, and let the sunlight pour in. It felt strange, this calmness. Like my body didn't know what to do without chaos. Because when you've lived in emotional turbulence long enough, peace almost feels suspicious. I started journaling again. Not the polished kind, but raw, messy scribbles that made no sense sometimes. I wrote about the things I'd never said out loud. How small I'd felt trying to fit into someone else's idea of love. How I'd confused control for care. And how I'd mistaken silence for safety. Writing became a mirror, and for the first time, I didn't look away. One evening, my therapist asked me, "When did you first start believing that love had to hurt to be real?" That question hit harder than any breakup. I thought back to being younger, watching my parents argue, watching my mother forgive, again and again, in the name of love. I grew up thinking pain was proof of depth. That suffering meant sincerity. So when I met Liam, and everything felt intense and complicated, I thought, this must be love. But it wasn't. It was a performance of love, scripted by my own wounds. It's wild, isn't it? How we recreate what broke us. Thinking if we can just do it right this time, it'll finally stop hurting. But healing, I learned, isn't about doing it again. It's about not needing to. I started walking more, just around the neighborhood, no music, no distractions. I wanted to hear my own thoughts without the static. Sometimes, the memories still crept in. The way he'd hold my hand while driving. The nights we'd talk until dawn. The stupid inside jokes that still made me smile. But the difference now was, they didn't control me. They were just echoes. One Sunday afternoon, I ran into an old friend who had known us as a couple. She smiled and asked casually, "Have you two talked again?" I smiled back and said, "Yeah, once. But that story's over now." She nodded, maybe surprised by how calmly I said it. That night, I realized something. Healing doesn't make you forget. It just makes remembering less painful. There's a kind of grief no one talks about. The grief of losing who you were when you loved someone. That version of me. The one who waited, who begged to be understood, who silenced her own voice to keep someone else comfortable. She was gone, and I missed her sometimes. Not because she was right, but because she tried so hard. One day, I went through an old folder on my laptop. Photos, voice notes, letters we never sent. I hovered over the delete button for a long time. And then, instead of deleting, I moved them into a new folder and renamed it Lessons, because that's what it all was. In the end, a lesson I paid for with pieces of myself. And that's okay. Some lessons cost more because they're the ones that actually change you. Weeks passed. Life became normal again. Grocery lists, laundry, long talks with friends, late-night laughter. But somewhere inside, a quiet transformation was happening. I started to like my own company. I stopped apologizing for being too emotional. I started dressing the way I wanted again, not the way he liked. And slowly, piece by piece, I rebuilt the person I used to mute for love. One morning, while making breakfast, I realized I was humming. No particular song, just a small absent-minded hum. It sounds insignificant, but it wasn't. It was the sound of life returning. For the first time, I wasn't living in reaction to him. I was just living. That night, as I sat on my balcony watching the city lights, I whispered something I'd been too afraid to say before. I forgive myself. Not for loving him, but for losing myself while doing it. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not moving on. But coming home, there's something strange about healing. It never announces itself. You never wake up one day and say, "I'm better now." It creeps in quietly, almost shyly, like sunlight through curtains you forgot to close. A few months had passed since I last spoke to Liam. The world had moved on, but part of me was still learning how to exist without the constant ache. I'd stopped checking my phone every morning, but sometimes late at night, I still caught myself wondering if he ever thought about me. Healing doesn't erase curiosity. It just makes it softer. I'd gotten into a routine: work, therapy, journaling, and long drives with the windows down. There was a peace and solitude I'd never known before. I stopped chasing intensity and started noticing gentleness instead. The sound of rain, the way my coffee steamed in the morning light, the rhythm of my own breathing when I didn't have to walk on emotional eggshells. One day my friend Maya dragged me to an art class. "You need to do something that's not thinking," she said, laughing as she shoved a paintbrush into my hand. I hadn't painted since college and I was terrible at it, but as the colors spread across the canvas, messy and unplanned, I realized how much I'd missed creating without control. There was something beautifully imperfect about it. That's when I met Daniel. He wasn't like Liam. He didn't walk in with a spark or mystery, or that intoxicating pull that made me lose sense of gravity. He was normal, calm, kind. The type of person who asked how your day was and actually listened to the answer. At first I kept my distance, not because he did anything wrong, but because peace felt foreign to me. I didn't know how to exist without tension. I'd been addicted to the highs and lows for so long that calmness felt suspicious. But Daniel didn't rush me. He didn't try to fix me or dig into my past. He simply existed beside me, quietly consistent. We'd talk about small things: music, food, random books neither of us had finished. Sometimes we'd sit in silence and it didn't feel heavy. It felt safe. One evening, after class, he offered me a ride home. The city lights blurred past us, and the hum of the car felt hypnotic. Out of nowhere, he said, "You look like someone who's learned to survive storms." I laughed softly. "And what gives you that impression?" he smiled. "Because you look like someone who doesn't trust sunny days yet." That hit deeper than I expected. I didn't know whether to thank him or cry. Because he was right. I didn't trust happiness yet. I was waiting for it to disappear the second I reached for it. But that night, when I got home, I stared at myself in the mirror and realized something. Maybe healing isn't about learning to forget pain. Maybe it's about learning to stop expecting it all the time. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a quiet presence in my life. We didn't label anything. I wasn't ready for love, and he seemed to understand that without me saying it. One night, while we walked by the lake, he stopped and looked at me. "You know," he said, "sometimes you talk like you're afraid of taking up space." I froze for a second. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, gentle as ever. "Like you think being too much will scare people away. But maybe the right person won't be scared. Maybe they'll be grateful you exist." Something about that moment cracked me open. It wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was real. For the first time, I felt seen without being studied. That night, I went home and wrote in my journal, "I want to be loved in a way that doesn't make me smaller." As the days went by, I noticed how much had changed. I laughed more. I said no when I meant no. I started cooking again, playing music, even dancing around the kitchen at midnight like no one was watching. It was messy and awkward, but it was me. Then one afternoon I got a message from Liam. Just seeing his name pop up made my stomach twist. The message was short. "Hey, hope you're doing okay. Can we talk?" My heart raced. It had been months. I stared at the screen, frozen between curiosity and dread. Part of me wanted closure. Another part whispered, "Don't go back." I didn't reply right away. I closed my laptop, went for a walk, and tried to breathe. The air felt heavier than usual, like the universe was testing everything I'd learned. That night, I wrote in my journal again. Sometimes the past doesn't want you back. It just wants to see if you're still waiting. I didn't know yet if I'd reply, but for the first time, the decision felt like mine. I wasn't that girl anymore, the one who begged to be understood, who folded herself to fit someone else's comfort. Now, I was a woman who'd learned the cost of silence and the value of peace. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to stop surviving love and start living it. The message sat there like a ghost, haunting the corner of my mind even when I tried to ignore it. Hey, hope you're doing okay? Can we talk? 5 words. That's all it took to pull me back into the mental labyrinth I'd spent months escaping from. It's terrifying how easy it is to slip into old patterns. You think you've healed, and then one familiar name reminds you that the past never really leaves. It just waits quietly, testing your strength when you least expect it. I didn't respond for 3 days. During that time, I felt like I was split in two. One part of me, the old me, whispered that maybe he'd changed. Maybe this time he'd understand. The other part, the one that had fought through sleepless nights in therapy and rebuilding herself from ashes, whispered back, "You don't owe him your peace just because he finally noticed your absence." By the 3rd day, curiosity won over caution. I replied with a single word. "Why?" He texted back almost instantly, as if he'd been waiting. "I just want to see you. Please. I need to talk in person." That word again. Please. The one that used to break me every time. I stared at the message for a long time before finally agreeing. Not because I wanted him back, but because I needed to face the ghost that had been haunting me. Closure isn't something people give you. It's something you take when you're ready. We met at the same coffee shop where we'd had our first date. It felt almost cinematic, the universe bringing us full circle. But instead of excitement, I felt detached, like I was watching a movie I'd already seen too many times. He walked in wearing that same leather jacket, the one I used to borrow just to feel close to him. For a moment, it almost felt familiar. Then he smiled, and I realized the man sitting across from me wasn't the same one I used to love. Or maybe I wasn't the same woman anymore. "Hey," he said softly, his eyes scanning my face like he was trying to recognize it. "You look different." "I am," I said. He sighed, running his fingers through his hair, that nervous habit I used to find endearing. "I've been thinking about us a lot, about how things ended. I wasn't fair to you. I stayed silent. I didn't want to comfort him this time." He continued, his voice trembling just enough to sound human again. "I judged you. I made you feel ashamed for being honest. I didn't understand you then, and I've hated myself for that. I wanted to feel something. Anger, sadness, maybe even relief. But all I felt was distance, the kind that comes when you finally outgrow someone." "I'm sorry, Isabella," he said, "for all of it. I should have listened. I should have tried." I nodded slowly. "You're right. You should have." His eyes flickered with something like hope. "So, is there any chance we could try again?" For a moment the air went still. I could hear the sound of a spoon clinking in a nearby cup, the low hum of conversation around us, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. And then, I said the hardest word I'd ever learned to say. "No." He blinked, like he hadn't expected it. "No?" I smiled, not cruelly, just honestly. "You're not a villain, Liam. You're just someone who wasn't ready to love me the way I needed to be loved. And that's okay. But I can't go back. I spent too long trying to make you see me. Now I finally do." He looked down, nodding slowly, and for the first time I saw it. Understanding. Not the kind that comes with regret, but the kind that comes with acceptance. When we said goodbye, it wasn't dramatic. No tears, no long embraces, no cinematic music swelling in the background. Just a quiet nod between two people who had finally stopped pretending. As I walked away from that cafe, I realized something profound. Closure doesn't mean forgetting someone. It means remembering them without wanting to go back. That night I told Daniel about it. We were sitting on my balcony, legs crossed, the city lights flickering below us. I thought I'd feel sad, I admitted. But I didn't. It felt like peace, Daniel smiled softly. Maybe that's because you finally chose yourself. I looked at him, at his calmness, his warmth, the gentle way he existed without taking up all the space in the room. For the first time, I understood what real intimacy felt like. Not the adrenaline of uncertainty, but the safety of being seen. You know what's crazy? I said, leaning back against the chair. I used to think love had to be intense to be real. Now I think it just has to be kind. He reached over and held my hand. No fireworks, no chaos, just steady warmth, and in that moment I realized the opposite of pain isn't joy, it's peace. I'd spent years chasing validation, mistaking attention for affection, passion for partnership. But love, real love, doesn't demand you to shrink. It expands you. That night, I fell asleep without replaying old conversations or second-guessing my worth. For the first time in a long time, I didn't dream about the past. I dreamed about a future. One that was still uncertain, but finally, beautifully, mine. They say healing isn't linear. It's a spiral. You revisit old pain from a higher level of awareness each time. And that's exactly what the last few months felt like. Not an ending, but a return. A return to myself. It's strange how you can spend years trying to find love in someone else's eyes, only to discover it was supposed to begin with your own reflection. One morning, I woke up before sunrise. The world was quiet, that rare, beautiful stillness before the city wakes up. I made coffee, wrapped myself in a blanket, and sat by the window. For a long time, I just watched the sky shift colors, deep blue melting into gold, and suddenly I started to cry. Not from sadness, but from something softer, something purer. Gratitude. Because for the first time, I wasn't crying for what I'd lost. I was crying for everything I'd gained by letting go. Liam was no longer the villain in my story. He was just a chapter, one that taught me where I end and where someone else begins. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't romanticize him either. He existed in a place between, the memory of a lesson, and Daniel. Well, he was still in my life, but I didn't need him to complete me. That was the biggest shift. Love no longer felt like something I needed to survive. It felt like something I could share, freely, without fear of disappearing inside it. A few weeks later, I went on a solo trip to the seaside. It wasn't planned. I just packed a bag, got in my car, and drove. There was something healing about the ocean, its rhythm, its honesty. It doesn't pretend to be calm. It just is what it is, wild and unapologetic. I spent hours walking along the shore, letting the waves wash over my feet. Every time the water pulled away, it felt like it was taking a little more of my old self with it. The fear, the shame, the guilt for wanting what I wanted. At one point, I stopped, looked out at the horizon, and whispered, "I forgive you." I didn't even know if I meant Liam or myself, maybe both. That night, I sat on the sand writing in my journal under the stars. My handwriting was shaky from the wind, but my words were steady. I used to think love was about finding someone who understands you. Now I know it's about understanding yourself, enough to never lose who you are again. The sea breeze brushed against my skin like a quiet applause. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. I was simply here. When I came back home, everything looked the same. My apartment, my street, even the tiny crack in the kitchen wall. But I wasn't the same. There was a stillness inside me now, not born from emptiness, but from peace. I started teaching art classes again, something I'd always been too scared to do. Watching others create reminded me of myself, messy, imperfect, but alive. And sometimes, when I caught my reflection in the studio mirror, I'd smile. Not because I was perfect, but because I was finally present. One evening, I found an old notebook from the early days of my relationship with Liam. Inside was a list I'd written. Things I want to be. The first item read, "Brave enough to be myself." I stared at that line for a long time. Then I closed the notebook, exhaled, and whispered, "You made it." Months later, I uploaded my first video, a short monologue about self-worth and boundaries. I didn't expect much from it, but the comments flooded in. People saying, "I needed this, and I thought I was alone." It hit me. The story I'd been so ashamed of was helping others heal too. Maybe that's the real purpose of pain. Not to break us, but to open us, so that light can pass through and reach someone else still stuck in the dark. Now, whenever I look back, I don't see a tragedy. I see a transformation. I see a girl who lost herself in the wrong kind of love, and a woman who found herself in the aftermath. I see someone who learned that love isn't supposed to silence you. It's supposed to echo with your truth. I see me, and maybe that's enough. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever been made to feel strange for what you desire, ashamed for what you feel, or small for wanting to be seen, I want to tell you something. You are not too much. You were just loving the wrong person the right way. And when the right one comes along, whether it's a person, a purpose, or peace itself, you'll know. Because you won't have to shrink for it. You'll finally fit. The woman I am today still feels the ache sometimes. Healing doesn't erase it. But now that ache feels like a reminder that I lived, that I learned, that I came home. And if I could go back and tell my younger self one thing, it would be this. Don't be afraid to lose people who are afraid of your truth. Be afraid of losing yourself trying to keep them. Because in the end, the bravest thing I ever did was stay. Stay with myself. If you were in my place, would you choose the person you loved, or the peace you finally found without them? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that hit where it hurts and heal where it matters.